You lived in Brazil, Spain for some time for studies, also Brazil for studies, Burundi, Ethiopia, now Greece.
Yes.
So that's 5 countries on the go so far. How
Yes.
this whole thing started? Like, it was a dream of you of living abroad, or it's something that it happened?
That's a good question. I think from early on, I was very interested in the entire world and not just my country and what was in front of me. I remember when I was a kid, my grandparents had a coffee table that had a globe in the center, and I would just spin it and be like, okay, that's where I'm going to live when I grow up.
So that's how Burundi appeared.
No, actually, when I interviewed for the job in Burundi, I had to Google, where is Burundi?
I mean,
yeah,
I get it. It's not the most common country in Africa either. Like, it's just like, okay, when you say Ethiopia, you can more or less place it, or like you've heard from it before. But maybe before that, I know that you first time living abroad was due to studies. It was Spain or
Madrid.
Brazil? Madrid. Mm-hmm. So when did that happen? Like, what is the moment of?
So with Spain, I didn't originally. Well, okay, I had a family vacation to Mexico when I think I was 19 or 20, and there was a little bit of family drama. We split ways for a few days and then came back together. And during the few days I was apart, I met so many lovely Mexican people and made just really quick friends. And I started speaking some Spanish and I fell in love with the language and the culture. And so when I went back to the US, I enrolled in the Spanish classes at the university. And that's what started my journey on foreign languages. And I wanted to study abroad to improve my Spanish in Chile. For some reason, I chose Chile. It was just like this random to me, it was this faraway place with a huge desert and somehow earthquakes. And I wanted to do that. I had a Chilean Spanish professor. She said, no, you have to go to the original, the origin of the Spanish language, to Spain. I said, okay, well.
And you went to Madrid.
I went to Madrid. I don't know if that's
the most populated with South American immigrants
nowadays.
In Spain, yes.
But so I'm maybe a few years older than you, Mark. I know that. A decade and a half older. So back then, in 25 years ago, Madrid was not so full of immigrants. It was very different, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because I went back for the first time last year on sort of a nostalgia tour. And I know that was the number one thing I noticed was different.
Yeah, I mean, there was tourism, but there was not much more of what we call now expats, or like immigrants who move from one country to the other. I don't know if in other places of Europe and United States for sure, like the whole immigration started much earlier. I think Spain kicks a little bit later also because our recent history that it's not that far away. So we were not really open.
There's an ocean between the two.
And a dictatorship fascist one that it's also dividing things a little bit more also.
Like closed borders, etc.
And the fact that we colonized half of South America, and I don't think that it's the most lovely thing to do either. So as a culture, but yeah.
No, of course not.
And so for how long were you in Madrid then?
I was in Madrid for 8 months.
Okay.
And I was very much focused on the study of the language. I had a Spanish boyfriend, which was very interesting. I lived with a Spanish family for a few months as well. Also very interesting.
Nice.
There's a lot of stories there, but I won't.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. When does Brazil comes into this whole thing? Like, because you also went to Brazil, you lived in Brazil afterwards as an expat, but you also studied there, or
I didn't actually study. I did an intensive Portuguese class. I guess that's studying, but not formal studies. Okay. So after one of my friends in university, she studied Portuguese and then moved to Brazil for an internship after university. Fell in love, got married there. A group of us went down for the wedding. I fell in love with the culture, with the music, and when I went back to Washington, D.C., where I had been living at the time, I enrolled in Portuguese classes and started doing some remote volunteer work and met a community that way that was based in Brazil. And after a couple of years, I was working at an accounting firm. I was traveling around the US doing audits for labor unions. And so that was kind of exciting, but it was kind of boring as well. And the travel was nice, the work not so exciting. And I had sort of a quarter life crisis, I would call it. And
quarter life crisis.
Yeah, quarter life crisis. I said, you know what? I just need to do something that for me, you know, I felt like I had a lot of pressure to like, you know, make money, save money, succeed, you know, kind of like this success paradigm that I think a lot of people, at least in my home country, have. And I realized I wasn't doing it for me. I was kind of doing it just because I thought I should be financially secure, etc. And so I actually had a panic attack on an airplane between DC and Dallas. And I was like, wow, what I'm doing all of this. I called my dad later and he was just like, what are you doing with your life? Like, you should do something for yourself. Like, if this isn't what you want, it's okay, you're right. And so I quit my job, broke up with my boyfriend, which you have to do before you go to Brazil. And then I went to sorry.
Was still the Spanish boyfriend?
No, it was not still the Spanish boyfriend. But I got in touch with, I was already in touch with an organization in Bahia, in the northeast of Brazil. And I was already speaking Portuguese, which is quite easy if you already speak Spanish. And I got the 6-month tourist visa and I moved there. And I enrolled in I did an intensive Portuguese class for a month, which was great. And I did some volunteer work at a women's music school. And I helped friends with different projects, etc. And it was a really, really, really great experience, I would say. Yeah, it was a break that I needed, you know, after working for 3.5 years. I'm a strong believer in enjoying life while we're young and not just waiting until, you know, retirement, which was the expectation I grew up with. You know, you work really hard, and then when you're 65, you stop work and you enjoy life. Then you relax, you travel, and all of this, which with this, like I see now with my dad and my stepmother, they do this, but they're 75. They can't walk long distances. They can't see, you know, if you want to see the world, I feel like the time to do it is when you're young or middle-aged. Like older, yeah, you can still do it, but you're not going to have the same mobility, most likely.
Of course. It makes it different.
Yeah, it does. But I think a lot of people don't think about it that way, or they get locked into this. I don't know. There's lots of different scenarios that people get locked in.
Of course, but at the end, it's also what you were saying. No? You're coming with a stigma or like a society pressure or like family pressures of being inside of this, I don't know, stable job, easy money, like having savings, buying a house, routine,
taking the next step each time. Yeah.
And if you are focused on that, you cannot be focused on discovering. You know? Maybe sometimes. You touched one point though that it was interesting, and I want to ask you a little bit more about that, and it's the whole volunteering world and volunteering work that you've been doing. And I know that you work also in Africa and in multiple NGOs and everything. Was that the moment that you discovered that you like that? It's really your passion, or where does the whole volunteering approach work?
That's a really interesting question, because even when I was in Washington, D.C., I was doing not necessarily volunteer work, but my work has always had sort of a social mission. So with labor unions, I mean, that's quasi-social, I would say. And then the first job I had wasn't so much, but I guess it's a good question. I think in my family, there's always been a sense of you should be contributing to the world, and you should be contributing to society, like a sense of social and civic responsibility. Like a lot of my family is in government or medicine, and so it's sort of that I think it's just like a value that I have, and I've continued with in the work that I did in Brazil wasn't, I don't know if it was a turning point. It wasn't that fulfilling, to be honest. To be perfectly honest. I mean, I was like a couple evenings a week, like helping women learn some English. It wasn't, I wasn't terribly like, I mean, I think learning of foreign languages is important in helping people, but I don't know. I think, you know, to really be engaged in something and to get fulfillment from that, like a longer period of time and deeper engagement is, for me, it's what is necessary. But yeah, it did get me started. Actually, it was great for my CV. I mean, if we want to be honest, like it was really good because then I had this international thing on my CV. It's not why I did it, but in retrospect, it helped me get my next job in international policy work. And then it helps me later on get the job in Burundi that I had and start working in international development, because you can't do it without.
So you came back, you came back to the United States.
Yeah,
between Brazil and Burundi, you didn't go from Brazil to Burundi.
No, from Brazil. So after.
Sounds like a song title. So from Brazil to Burundi would be a very good reggae song. Sorry.
From Brazil to. So when my visa expired in Brazil, and I returned to the U.S., but I really wanted to return. I really wanted to go back to. I wanted to emigrate to Brazil because I loved it, and. So I was like, okay, I will. But then I was like, well, I want to go backpacking in Southeast Asia for a couple of months first before I settle down somewhere. So I was working at a bar. Anyways, I fell into, through a friend, I fell into an internship at an NGO, a big international NGO in DC, because I had data analysis skills. So that was very useful for them in their research and policy analysis department. So I started with that, and I was pretty good at it. I was like fast writer, etc. So I kind of stayed in that field for about 5 years in DC, and I didn't end up immigrating to Brazil, but I did go on the backpacking trip to Southeast Asia, and for 2 months, which was really cool. And then I went. After about I did the policy thing, the international policy thing. But after about 5 years, I was kind of, I was writing a lot about African agriculture in the end. I was an expert in African agriculture, but I had never worked in African agriculture in Africa. I mean, that's how the international policy stuff works. And so that wasn't very satisfying to me. I like the process of writing. I love the research process, but that aspect of it wasn't. So I started looking, and I always knew from when I finished university, I knew I wanted to live overseas. So I started looking for jobs, and I had a partner for like, I had a boyfriend for like 3 months or so. And I basically told him like, hey, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to move overseas. Are you in? Are you out? And he said, oh, well, I want an interesting life. Sure, let's do it. So
3 months in.
After 3 months in, because it was basically like, hey, we either end this now or like let's embark on this. So it was pretty quick.
Did he know where Burundi was, though?
Well, it took me about 6 months. I think it took me about.
Okay.
Yeah, it took a while to find the job in Burundi, and we did live together before we moved. But I mean, I was looking at jobs in China, like teaching English in China, or a few.
So the overseas was really like wherever it is.
It was like anywhere.
Okay.
And I remember we had this piece of paper, and we were just like writing down the names of countries. Like, would you live there? Okay, yeah, I'd live there. Oh, there. What about there? I mean, this is this whole brainstorming process. But in the end, you're just like, if you need a job, you're just applying for jobs that you find. It's like
clearly in the piece of paper, Burundi was not there. No?
Burundi was not on the paper. Yeah, neither was Ethiopia. I mean, Senegal was, South Africa, the countries that you've heard of in Africa that are like